kudos to the likes of Golf Australia. They've looked at that and gone, well, okay, let's have a look at what that means. How do we do things differently?
Yeah.
How do we use our spaces differently? How does golf be a different sport offering?
Yeah.
Does golf have to be golf as we think about it?
Yeah.
Can it just be going down to the driving range and having a hit?
That was the voice of Dan Ferguson, the guest on this episode of The Knowledge Mill. I'm your host, Greg Yoakum. As a public servant turned consultant, and now as an academic researcher, Dan Ferguson has been lucky enough to combine his education in sports science and urban planning to forge a decade-long career within the government sector. Having worked in private consulting, 2 Victorian Councils, Victorian State Government, and a YMCA-managed aquatic centre, he has a unique combination of experience in the private, public, and not-for-profit sectors. During this time, he established a firm belief in #collaboration over competition. That's why he founded the boutique planning consultancy, theCommunityCollaborative, to act as a vehicle to harness the collective power of industry, mainly servicing local government clients. Dan is a keen supporter of industry and the broader sport and community sector. He is currently the Executive Officer of Industry Association Parks and Leisure Australia for Victoria and Tasmania, as well as a member on the Partnerships Committee of the Australian Society for Physical Activity, the ASPA. He has previously held the role of chairperson of the SouthPort Community Centre and has been involved in various other community organizations. Dan has worked across diverse areas, including sport, social development, and public health. However, the majority of his career has focused on creating healthy communities through the built environment, from negotiating multi-million-dollar stadium upgrade contracts on behalf of the state government to planning where footpaths should go in a local park. This has led to Dan embarking on the PhD journey within Swinburne University's Sport Innovation Research Group, with a research focus on the provision of public infrastructure that supports physical activity. This episode of The Knowledge Mill was recorded on December 1st, 2023 on the campus of the University of Canberra during the 29th Annual SMANS Conference. Show notes, including links to more information on some of the topics that Dan and I discuss, can be found at theknowledgemill.com/episode 10. That's episode and the numerals 10.
Hi, Dan. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Absolutely. It's been a little while in the making, actually, because we tried to do this last year, but I overbooked myself.
Good problem to have.
Yeah, that's right. It's just hard to find when you're at a conference, hard to find those windows of opportunity to sit down with people. But I'm glad we could make this work. We're here on day 2 of the conference, the last day of the conference. How are you finding it so far?
Yeah, really good, really good. It's probably my first official academic conference, let's say. Last year's SMANS being on the home ground, let's say, being on the Swinburne campus. It wasn't quite, it didn't feel like a real one, let's say, being that we were hosting it. So there's little bits and pieces we were doing. Yeah. We were running some of the sessions and things like that. So it didn't quite feel like a real one. This one, getting to travel, come to Canberra for it, feels like a real one. So it's kind of my first real academic conference that I've been able to come to.
Yeah, gotcha. So, because, that's I spoke to Olivia yesterday, who listeners will hear in another episode, and she was talking about how chairing those sessions, and she went home at night, so it sort of felt like a job rather than a conference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas this one, you get back to the hotel, you kind of, the things you thought about throughout the day and you heard about, they're just there and kind of ruminating in your brain. You've got that free time to think about those things.
Yeah,
that's kind of the difference. You're just in conference mode.
It
kind of makes all the difference.
You've got that space to think and digest. Yeah, absolutely. Have you met any interesting folks or?
To be honest, it's probably everybody I met last year, and it's being able to reconnect with everybody. Obviously, being a PhD student, I'd say I'm not, widely known, I guess, to the academic world, let's say. So
wait until they hear this podcast.
Hopefully. But it's good just to be able to get back out there, get a face in front of people again, make those connections again and go, that's right, met you last year, and just make those connections again. The HDR day on day 1, so we all came up early on the Wednesday. It's good to get all the PhD and HDR the students back together again, get the band back together again. So it's always a great part of these conferences as well, getting everybody that are, kind of on your same playing level, so to speak, together, share your experiences. That's always a great part of it. Yeah. So the same people, again, met last year, carried on through. this year. It's good to see those faces in particular as well.
Absolutely. And what I'm a couple years past the PhD, but I find, my people at the conference are still the cohort that I went through the HDR things with.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm seeing that even just from SMANS last year to SMANS this year. It's the same familiar faces, particularly from the HDR session last year of, hey, familiar face, I'm coming to you at the breaks, at the afternoon teas, at the lunches.
Yeah.
I'm coming to you to have the conversations and create those connections. And I imagine that's going to be the next 3, 4, 5 years beyond.
Yeah, that's right. And as everyone individually grows their personal network, then you tap into that and they tap into yours, and that's how the magic happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. So can you tell me the story of how you found yourself doing a PhD?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a strange one. It all started with a walk during COVID, actually.
Okay.
So I have a friend, Chelsea Taylor. Shout out to Chels. We go way back to working at a sports store, retail sports store, many years ago. Used to play at the same soccer club, things like that. Grew up in the same area way back when. She was doing a PhD at Swinburne at the time. During COVID, wasn't much to do other than go for walks. So I reached out to Chels and just said, hey, how's your PhD going? What are you up to? Let's go for a walk and just catch up, like old times, and see what's going on. And she just went through the process of how the PhD is going, what it's been doing, what she's been up to. And it kind of just planted the seed for me around, hey, there's a whole interesting space here, the world of academia. It's not an area I had thought of previously.
Yep.
It wasn't something I hadn't set out to be an academic. It wasn't in my playbook for life, for my career, for what was going to be. Academia wasn't part of that for me originally. So that was the kind of planting of the seed. And so Chels was the generation, the generator of that for me. So a big shout out to Chels. So hopefully she hears this. I'll send this to her, so she'll hear it.
We'll make sure she sees it.
Exactly. So that was the kind of generator of that. So she put me in contact with Adam Karg at Swinburne, who's the director of the Sport Innovation Research Group at Swinburne, and things just went from there in terms of the process of, hey, what are the options in this space? So I guess taking it all the way back to where things kind of have blossomed in this space for me, and what that kind of seed that Chelsea planted around, hey, PhD, have a think about this, has come from, I guess, my career. I've come from industry, so that's been my space. I'm an industry person coming to the academic world. So I've spent probably 15 years working in local and state government, essentially doing everything in and around the sport and recreation space. So whether that be policy work, right through to designing parks, kind of you name it, anywhere in between. But both sport, I've also done work in kind of public health, social planning, Indigenous relations, family violence, quite a wide kind of different bit of work. It's the fantastic thing about local government. It's a fantastic career. If anyone's ever thinking about local government, great career. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of different things you can do in the space. But yeah, it's predominantly been sport and recreation. And I've really pushed down the space around designing spaces and places for people to be physically active, essentially. That originally blossomed from me doing exercise science at uni originally. So my undergraduate was exercise science at Deakin. I had grand dreams of originally being a professional sports player. Quickly realised that wasn't going to happen. I was a average at best soccer player, maybe slightly above average. That's probably about the level I got to. There was an American scholarship offer there at a point in time, but I wasn't that good. It would have been Div 3 at best, kind of American scholarship. I wasn't very good at soccer, so nothing to highlight there at all. But realised, pro athlete wasn't going to happen, so exercise science was next best. Let's work in pro sport. Then quickly realised, hey, it's probably not going to happen there either. As part of that uni placement you had to do as part of that 100 hours kind of typical placement process, I managed to actually get a placement with a consultant that worked in the local government space. So did the planning on behalf of councils around, hey, you should build sports facilities here, here and here, or this is the type of sports facility you need for the community.
Right.
You're going to have this many people that are moving here, or it's a new community that's being built, this many people moving in, this is the type of community it'll be. You need X footy ovals, X cricket facilities, whatever it might be, and providing that expertise, I guess, to council around that. I had no idea that was even an option
Yeah,
in terms
right.
of a career option. So going through university, I had no idea local government was a potential career path at all. So that kind of opened up my eyes to that whole career path. So I jumped into that kind of feet first. Managed to land a graduate role in that space. So I was a graduate assistant planner for a private consulting company that did that kind of work for a while. Decided I needed to go back and get some skills in that space. So I actually went back and did a graduate diploma in urban planning to kind of get that planning side of stuff. So I had this weird mix of exercise science and urban planning, which was just a bit of an odd mix to have, but it was just trying to blend that sport and planning stuff together.
Yeah.
So I did that. I've worked for the past 15 years in that space. So I've gone from, planning or, working with state government departments, writing, working with lawyers to write contracts to hand over $225 million to the state government for the Marvel Stadium redevelopment.
Right.
Through to where should a path go in a local park. Quite a difference in scale there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But everything in between.
Yeah.
And so it's really been always about, well, what can we do to make the public space better for people and just improve people's lives, improve the space. Hopefully, that they get something out of it. They enjoy their life better. They can be more physically active. That's always been my bent to things, and that's the exercise science coming back into things. That's my passion is exercise, fitness, and health. So it's always been, well, what can we do to get people more active? That's always been my bent. And so that's kind of been my career space, designing spaces for that. Through that has kind of been, there's always been questions around, I've always been providing expertise in this space. So while I've worked for 15 years in local government, a number of different local government, different councils, and also state government, as I said, I've also established a consultancy. So I work as a private consultant myself, have my own consulting company that provides this expertise to councils. I'm also the executive officer of an industry association called Parks and Leisure Australia. So they essentially are the industry association for staff that work in parks, recreation, sport in local government. So the council staff, we are the industry association that represents them.
Okay.
So similar to a SMANS type of scenario, but in that world. So similarly, we run conferences, professional development, advocacy, et cetera, so do all of that. So I do that as well. But throughout that kind of career and providing, I guess, that expertise that they buy in as a consultant and saying, you should look at building these facilities. I'll do things like park master plans. So work with the community and council around, hey, we're going to upgrade your park. What should be in that park? What do you want to see there? And then providing the expertise around, and this is what I think should be in there based on the community and changing trends in participation, things like that, utilising all the data and the research that's out there. This is probably what you should look at building here. There's always been kind of questions there around, we think this is what's needed.
Right.
But it's always been the we think.
Yeah.
Not we know.
Yeah.
So there's always been that kind of little bit of grey there.
Yeah.
So, and that's really what comes back to how I was saying about the generation of the PhD and Chelsea planting that seed originally around, her experience around PhD. She had come from industry as well at the time to jumping over into the PhD. And she was explaining that the world of the PhD in academia, and she spoke glowingly of it. Me being in industry and having these questions, I was like, hey, this is going to be a great way to try and answer some of these questions that it didn't seem anyone was answering. Maybe I can try and fill that void and answer some of those questions. So some of those bugbears that I have as a practitioner, hey, why don't I go and answer them? Yeah. So that became the kind of generation of my PhD. Okay. And what's become my thesis, essentially, is trying to answer those questions.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess the thesis and what I'm looking at, and the running thesis title I'm going with at the moment is Giving Active Recreation a Sporting Chance.
Oh, nice.
So that's what I'm running with. A little bit of a play on words there. Yeah. Hopefully it's catchy enough that
I enjoy some good wordplay.
Grab some attention, hopefully. But essentially looking at things, and active recreation infrastructure is what I'm focusing on. So what are public land managers installing in public places with the intent of getting people physically active?
Yep.
Traditionally, people think of outdoor exercise equipment, So you might see people installing the outdoor fitness equipment in your local park. That tends to be what people think of immediately, and that's 100% part of what I'm looking at.
Yep.
And it's a kind of major part of what I'm looking at. But I'm also looking at other things like tennis rebound walls. So you might see the walls that councils install just to go down and practice tennis.
Yeah.
Basketball half courts.
Yeah.
Skate parks even. So it's the unstructured things that you can go down and do without having to book.
Yeah.
You just go to your local park and you can play.
Yeah.
So it's got the kind of sport element to it, but it's not competition. It's not booked. You don't pay.
Yeah.
It's just provided free for you to go and do it.
Yeah.
That's the stuff I'm interested in.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's really been a built off of the change in trends in participation that we've seen kind of nationally, globally, but nationally, particularly here in Australia, where we've kind of seen traditional sport decline.
Yep.
And what's replaced that has been active recreation, or the kind of individual pursuits. Running, walking, cycling through the roof, general fitness activities through the roof.
Yeah.
Seeing things like parkrun go absolutely bananas.
Yep.
And that's because it combines the kind of individual pursuit of running, but with a community around it.
Yeah.
So we've seen those kind of things go absolutely bananas. So it's about, well, what can we do as public land managers? How can we create the environments that support that?
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just trying to flip the script of, does all research always have to be about sport? Hey, let's look at the other stuff that's there, because there's not enough research in that space.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to fill that void.
Yeah. And so, as you've outlined it, because I was thinking as you're describing your career leading up to the PhD and all these things that you are currently doing, and you hadn't yet started to talk about the PhD. So you're busy.
Just a little bit, yeah. There's a bit going on.
But there's you in many different ways seem to have your feet in two different fields: sport exercise, but also sport management, land planning and development, but also I would say like human-centered design, understanding. Okay, we build this thing, and we, like you were saying, you think somebody's going to use it, but will they actually use it? How do they utilize that space? Do they just walk right past the skate park? Do they live one block away and don't know the skate park's there? Is any of that a factor in what you're doing?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So my PhD is it's kind of breaking off into two areas. One of it is essentially looking at kind of the investment and delivery space. So how are government making decisions around what's going to be provided and how will it be funded? And a lot of that is me looking at sport v active recreation.
Yeah.
Who's getting the money? Who's not? Why are those decisions being made? And then the other side of it is, well, who are actually using the different type of infrastructure? So actually getting the data around that.
Yeah.
And that is that kind of information. So the skate park, well, who's using it? We assume, and I say we in terms of the planners at local government, assume it is teenagers and generally teenage boys that are using skate parks. Well, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We think so. There's limited research that's out there. I'm hoping to fill some of that void.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing for all of the different types of infrastructure. So I'm trying to get that data. So what that means in terms of my actual PhD and the approach that I'm going with that, the investment side of things, I'm sitting down, or have sat down, interviews with government managers around that investment piece. Hey, how do you plan for these things at the moment? How do the funding decisions get made? Going through that whole process and walking through that process with them. So sitting down and having interviews with them. I've then expanded that out to a representative survey. So tried to get every council in Victoria involved in that survey. Got about 75% at the moment. So good coverage.
Yeah, that's great.
So there's 79 councils in Victoria. I've got 75% of them to do that survey. So decent coverage. And that's pulled out some really good findings and results. The interesting thing for me, being from industry and being from the world, researcher bias. I think of the issues, and I think I know the issues that I've experienced.
Yep.
But I need to leave those on the table when I come into these.
Yeah.
To get it from the participants themselves and from the stakeholders.
Yeah.
So I've been very, very cautious in everything I've been doing to just try to leave my own bias on the table. Yeah. Come into it very blindly, attempt to, and just have it being very open book. And what are the issues? What's the process? And almost saying to them, because generally they do know me from my roles in industry and things like that. Look, act as if you don't know me, who I am, or my background, as if I am a layperson that's not been around the industry, to talk me through the process, so that I can extract the information and the data from them, without that kind of bias coming into it from me going, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. You don't have to explain it. No, explain it, because I need that as part of the process.
And are you finding some interesting things in asking them to do that?
It's no. Yeah, so probably not the answer you were hoping there. So I say no, just in terms of what is coming out is what I was expecting to come out.
Okay.
So it's probably been good in terms of it's confirmed what I thought I knew.
Yeah.
So for me, I've gone awesome, tick.
Yeah.
I was right, awesome. But it's been good because I've done that without leading them a certain way, which has been really good. So it's been able to confirm what I thought were issues or I thought was the process just from my experience. Mm-hmm. And it's confirmed that, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And it means that I can move forward with the rest of the research confidently.
Yeah.
That what I thought should be the process and the reason why is because it's been found with what I've done through the interviews and the surveys, which is really good, really positive.
Yeah, that's right. Got some solid footing to.
Yeah. So that's the that's the kind of first piece of it, I guess, around the investment and the funding, and hopefully there'll be some interesting things coming out of that and publications next year around that in particular. And then the other side of it, as I said, is kind of the understanding who are the actual people using this infrastructure and the equipment and things like that. Mm-hmm. So that is going to be site observations. So I will literally be that creepy dude watching people at the park.
Right.
So I like to leave that kind of image with people that next time you see some creepy, weird dude standing at a park, just think of me.
Taking pictures, got his clipboard.
Yeah.
What's this guy doing?
So no pictures. That's going to be that's the very clear for ethics. No pictures, no interaction.
Yep. Well, especially doing with youth. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just whoever's at the park and using it, I'm just observing what they're doing and who they are essentially, and just recording. Yep. So essentially, age, gender. That's essentially to the extent that I'm interested in, and it's about the extent that you can get without having to interact with people.
Yeah.
But also what it is that they're doing as well. Mm-hmm. So are they just there and experiencing the park, sat on a park bench or whatever it may be? Mm-hmm. Are they using equipment? To what extent are they using the equipment? Are they being vigorously active? Are they just kind of hanging around? What does it look like? Yeah. So there's a methodology out there called SouthPort, originated in America. So system for observing physical activity and recreation in communities. Okay. Is what it stands for. I love acronyms, but it's essentially observing people in parks and what they're doing. Yep. So that'll be me, being the creepy dude in a park. But the whole intent is to get as many different types of infrastructure, get the data on who the people are that are using the different types, and performing some kind of comparative analysis between the infrastructure. Yeah. The long-term outcome of that is almost like a menu item list for councils to say, hey, are you trying to provide equipment for, females between 30 to 50? Well, hey, the data that we've collected said that the highest, the participation for that demographic, the equipment that was used highest was this. Right. Make of that what you wish. Interpret that as you wish, but just to provide some of that kind of grounding. It doesn't exist at the moment. So a lot of things at the moment are just done on assumptions and done on limited feedback from councils of we've installed something, it got used. We installed something, it didn't. Yeah. It's kind of trial and error. Yeah. There's not a lot of rigorous data that's available on it. So trying to plug those holes.
I'm curious to know because you have the council side of things, and we talk a lot in sport management about the role of, for example, a national sport organization and has member state organizations that are responsible for the promotion and running of any given sport. But you said there's 79 different councils in Victoria, probably 79 different attitudes toward what these public spaces are for, as well as because there's that political element. I could say I build a park. Do I need to say I build a good park that people use, or are you finding any of that?
Yeah, look, one of the key things that is coming through is politics. Yeah, but is one of the biggest drivers for anything, whether it be my research or what I'm doing with the active recreation space, or you look at the whole sports rorts things that have been going on over a couple of years ago. Politics, it's undeniable, it happens.
Yeah.
And it does happen at a local level as well, and funding decisions are made based on that. So it's definitely something that is coming through. And in particular, when you're looking at the comparison of kind of spend on sport v other things, sport is quite powerful in that you've got, large groups of the community bandied around one thing, being their local sports club and sports facility. Quite powerful.
Yeah.
You've got a large group of people there. Hey, we're 500 strong, 300 of them are kids. You've got the parents that are attached to those kids. We're all going to vote for you if you build our facility. That's powerful.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Hey, we want a walking track around the lake. Where's the 500 people that are grouped together fighting for that? There isn't.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding that kind of power dynamic as well, and how do you create the environment to make those decisions internally for councils. And a lot of it comes down to the data. So even where some of the councils are trying to have those conversations internally and make those decisions and understanding, look, participation for sport v non-sport activities, they're polar opposites, but kind of funding is the opposite. How do we not even level out, but just change that a little bit and get some of the funding a little bit different?
Yeah.
Data is what will help that discussion.
Yeah.
The data's not there. They haven't got the data to be able to fight that fight, so to speak. I'm hoping what I generate can help with some of that discussion.
Yeah.
And hopefully, push back on some of the politics. The unfortunate thing, politics is politics. It's always going to be there, and it will unfortunately always happen.
But you could change the calculus, and that,
Correct.
That
So
can make a big impact on.
Yeah, exactly right. And I guess the big thing as well in this space in particular is the value, the dollar value of things. A sports facility can be millions and millions of dollars. Active recreation infrastructure in comparison is quite low value wise.
Right.
To install outdoor exercise equipment comparative to building a new sports pavilion or something like that, the dollar value is significantly different.
Yeah.
So, a small change in contribution of funding can make a significant difference in what gets delivered.
Yeah.
Comparatively.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I'm not necessarily banging down the drum to say, hey, let's just flip the script on the funding here and just change everything we're doing and it's all wrong.
Yeah.
But hey, let's just make some tweaks here maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think we can make some real powerful change
Yeah.
in physical activity.
And if you put it in their terms as well, this is how you can build political capital out of making these evidence-based decisions for your constituents. That could be...
Exactly right. And I think that's part of the assisting council staff having those conversations and making those justifications as well around, yes, there might not be the 500 strong group, but there's, 5,000 people doing that activity.
Yeah.
Or, in that community in particular, there's 1,000 of them in that community doing that activity, providing that data and starting those conversations and allowing them to have the data that supports that.
Yeah.
And saying, we know that piece of infrastructure will support this demographic group because there's data that says so.
Yeah. Are there any, you mentioned the observations, are you doing any interviews or things like that to understand how people engage with these?
No. So not as part of my research. It is purely observational at this stage, just to understand who they are.
Yeah.
In the future, ideally, there would be some additional work just around understanding their kind of user preferences around, so why did you choose to come to this park, this piece of equipment, and get some of that understanding as a kind of add-on and a build-on.
Yeah.
But it's that golden thing of doing a PhD of you start out here and you keep getting told, hey, you need to bring it in. Hey, you need to bring it in.
Yeah.
Hey, bring it in. I'm still being told now, hey, you need to bring this in.
Yep.
Where can you?
Never stops.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's I think I've probably mentioned this in every interview that I've done on these podcasts. But the best piece of advice I ever received in my PhD is just do the one PhD. Don't do 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I think I landed at about 1.5, which I felt pretty good about. But yeah, that's you can never be too specific when it comes to delivering that thesis anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is kind of the way that you're thinking about things, because it occurs to me, listeners might know that my background in my PhD is in human-centered design thinking, which is understanding people's lived experiences and how that informs their needs, but also how they engage with products and services that we and organizations are designing for them. And so, you're accidentally bumping up against some of those ideas. Certainly human-centered design is an element of what you're doing. And it occurs to me that you're talking about systems. Well, when you talk about councils and societies and built environments, you're absolutely talking about systems. Yep. Because have you considered any, or maybe this is the second PhD you're trying not to do, any kind of second order factors in all of this? Like, for example, you build this skate park and there was data, perhaps existing data, that supported building a skate park here, and then you build it, you find that it's underutilized, which goes against what the data told you, but you find out that's because there's nowhere convenient to park. Mm-hmm. And so people don't come to the space to use the thing, even though they are in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and look, it's something that as a recreation open space planner, I guess by trade, in terms of what I do as a consultant, and in that field, that is what I do, I guess, as a day job, let's say, and providing that expertise to councils is from a planning perspective. We factor in all of those different elements of, okay, doing a park master plan, yes, we should put in a skate park. How have we come to that determination? It is based on those factors of looking at things like travel time, DK. So, looking at 10, 20, 30-minute travel time distances, what kind of transport is it? Is it car? Is it bus? Is it skateboarding? Yeah. To skate to the skate park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things like that. They are all contextual factors that go into the placing of a piece of infrastructure at a site, and the strategic positioning of where things should be. Generally, they're done at a more broader level, so a more strategic level, and they'll hopefully be done at a municipal-wide level, so a council-wide level.
Yep.
So it'll be a council-wide strategy where they are looking at, maybe it is outdoor fitness equipment just as an example, and they'll hopefully do a strategy around, we're going to try and plug holes and ensure that the entire community can access an outdoor exercise equipment installation. And then they'll install those. And generally, they'll do them based on things like hierarchies and things like that. So they'll apply different kind of typologies to them. It'll be generally it's things like local level, it might be regional, and something in between, generally called a district or something like that. And they'll apply different kind of catchment areas around them. So a local one will be your thing at your local park. It'll only capture your local community. Might be a 10, 20-minute kind of catchment radius around it. It's just for that local community. Yeah. Something at the regional park, it's this big, huge installation. It's a fantastic site. The intent is it captures the whole municipality potentially. And it's somewhere that the whole family comes and they stay there for 2, 3, 4 hours. Yeah. And they plan and provide different things that cater for that different kind of catchment. Yeah. So they're all those kind of contextual things that go into the broader planning that hopefully councils do around that. So so definitely that kind of contextual stuff definitely comes into the planning for where these things go. Yeah. Generally. But it's still that councils are pretty good at that. It's still not perfect, and there's always, like, every council does it slightly differently. And I guess if you could talk to different recreation open space planners in terms of that as a kind of function and a job title, and they'll do it differently, and they'll have different thoughts on the processes and what's right and what's wrong. Yeah. But generally, councils are pretty good at doing that and planning things pretty strategically like that. Where what you're still missing, though, is that really good understanding of what type of infrastructure for who. Right. So they do well at placing things and going, okay, we know we need to have a playground, somewhere here in this kind of relative region. Yep. Hey, there's a park there. Let's pop it there. Yep. Or literally, we need to park somewhere. We need to put a park somewhere. It's a new development. Yep. New community being built. We need to put a park somewhere. Let's put it here because it's going to capture the whole. Pretty good at doing that. Yep. But understanding, well, that community has a very high youth demographic. What's the best thing for them? That the research and the data's not quite there for that. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to feel.
Right. And so
it's kind of best bang for buck. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking. I mean, you can't consider systems on systems on systems on systems because that just that's not possible, especially for one person and especially for one PhD. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to think about, if you have your focus of Victoria and the 79 councils there, there's growing up in Melbourne versus growing up in Sydney, kind of a rivalry between the cities, very different ways of living, very different ways of utilizing public spaces. So it's kind of an idiosyncratic context that you have to just focus on that state. Mm-hmm. But do you find that there are kind of 79 councils in Victoria? I assume some of those are rural, right? Yes. They're not all in Melbourne. Are you finding that there's difference in attitudes across maybe a rural versus a suburban council, or is it pretty aligned?
So my, I guess my sample of councils that have been involved have been right across the gamut of types of councils, mm-hmm. Both regional, metro, rural, and right across the kind of income levels in terms of rates generation, things like that. So it's been quite a good sample from that perspective. And it has been relatively similar in terms of their thoughts and approach to providing active recreation mm-hmm. infrastructure, particularly around the thought process of knowing that they need to invest in that more, or that they see the value in investing in it, mm-hmm. definitely for the community, and they understand that the community are opting to do that.
Yeah.
And facilitating that is a role of council. Mm-hmm. The difference is in regional and rural areas, the local sports club is still the hub and the home of the community.
Yep.
Which is a bit different to metropolitan areas. Mm-hmm. So definitely regionally, the local sports club's still the home. It's the heart. It's the beating heart of the community. And it still is.
Yeah.
And so will still attract the funding, and arguably still should attract the funding. You could perhaps argue the other way in kind of metro areas where mm-hmm. you're, let's say, spoilt for choice in terms of where you might go mm-hmm. to play sport. You might have 6 options of your local sports club to go to. Perhaps that's where you can challenge some of those decisions around funding and things like that. Whereas the regional space, regional councils, the local sports club, as I said, it's the beating heart of the community.
Yeah.
Investing in that sports club is still probably should still be priority one.
Yeah, the only show in town.
Yeah. So it's a little bit more around, well, that's probably where the best bang for buck scenario, mm-hmm. which is what I'm trying to answer with the, which infrastructure for who, mm-hmm. and that best bang for buck, that's probably where the most power is for them.
Yep.
And a lot of the time, a lot of the regional councils I speak with, it's an older demographic mm-hmm. that they're working with in terms of their community. So being able to say, yes, if you install this type of infrastructure, the data does show that the older demographic do use that equipment.
Right.
That'll give them the power to, it'll give them the, I guess the grounding and the impetus to go, okay, you know what, maybe we will invest in this infrastructure.
That leads me to another question I wanted to ask you, which is, you've already kind of lightly answered it before I've asked it, because sport in Australia is very structured, mm-hmm. more so than in other Western developed countries. And so anytime you do something, Victoria as an example, I'm sure the AFL is not too far out of bounds and maybe wanting to get involved. Do you find some of that, like the big organizations like the AFL being the Australian Football League, which is the most popular sport in Victoria, are there those external influences in how we're going to make sporting or physical activity spaces and venues in local communities? Is there any of that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. In terms of how councils go about like the planning of facilities and designing of facilities, 100%. So all state and national sports organisations are involved with local councils around the planning and design of facilities, and will, to various levels, get involved locally mm-hmm. in projects and redevelopments and things like that, and help out in those spaces, and in certain instances provide funding where they can. Yep. AFL are an example, cricket is an example where they do have infrastructure funding available to clubs to help with projects and mm-hmm. things like that. So there are instances where that happens. And there's a few in particular that are, I guess, understanding the challenges that councils have and I guess the competition for space at the moment, particularly around metropolitan areas. Space is at a premium. You've probably seen in the media of late, particularly during COVID, golf courses is probably the key one that jumps out there. There's a bit here in Melbourne. There's been a bit recently in Sydney as well. Yeah,
news that they were going to take a golf course and split it in half for a public park.
So I think in Sydney just recently that has been approved to go through, I think.
It's certainly been announced.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah. It's
I'm
been,
not sure whether
it actually happens and hits the ground or not, but that came out. And here in Melbourne, obviously during COVID, there was a process where they opened up a golf course for public access during COVID because it was closed, you couldn't play. It was opened up to the public, and then post-COVID, public essentially said, we'll keep it open to the public.
Yeah.
So there's been some of those discussions being had, and kudos to the likes of Golf Australia. They've looked at that and gone, well, okay, let's have a look at what that means. How do we do things differently?
Yeah.
How do we use our spaces differently? How does golf be a different sport offering?
Yeah.
Does golf have to be golf as we think about it?
Yeah.
Can it just be going down to the driving range and having a hit?
Yeah.
Those types of things, like they're thinking in that way, which is really positive.
Yeah.
In terms of they're trying to change with what the consumer is looking for.
Yeah.
And it makes it better for councils as well in terms of they're looking at that going, okay, we can look at, wouldn't say the rationalisation of assets, but better utilisation of assets and the space.
Yeah.
So that, looking at something like tennis and, pickleball.
Yeah.
Going absolutely bananas.
Yeah.
In America, it's making its way here.
Yep.
It's happening. Everyone might deny it. It's happening. Tennis clubs here in Australia are jumping on that and going, well, we haven't got the space to build a new tennis court, but we can squeeze in a couple of pickleball courts.
Yeah.
Hey, let's do that.
Yeah.
It's a different offering for our members.
Yeah.
It might attract new members
that
don't want to play tennis, but they'll play pickleball.
Yeah.
Then they might jump over to tennis.
Yeah,
hey,
absolutely.
New members. So it's just some of these different offerings, and councils are looking at that and going, that's great because we're not having to provide space for an entire tennis court or two. We can get a couple of smaller courts, pickleball courts or tennis hot shots courts, which are the smaller size courts.
Yeah.
So some of these kind of different thinking that these national and state sport organisations are getting involved in.
And that's more on the other side of, because you were talking before about spaces that don't need to be booked.
Yes.
You can just turn up, whereas tennis courts, most usually
Generally.
you do need to book, and which is just one more barrier to participation.
Yeah.
Even someone, just take myself as a case study of one, I've become really interested in tennis over the last couple of years, and I see the appeal, and I really want to give it a try. And there are tennis courts right across the street from my unit. My veranda actually overlooks them. But I mean, there's multiple factors, including having a toddler and professional commitments, but it couldn't be more convenient if it were in my living room. It's right there. But the idea that I have to call and book, and then I have to turn up at that time, so it's now one more thing on my calendar, it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
So I think anything you can do to reduce those barriers.
100%. And I think that's been one of the biggest things that has driven the change in participation and the push to the kind of individual activities that we've seen, is that aspect of, it's the fear of commitment is what I've kind of been calling it. We've got a fear of commitment, and it's because we've got this hugely busy life. We're all dealing with all these different things that we're doing now, and that is that fear of commitment of going, I'm going to book at that time. I know I have to turn up, otherwise I don't get to play.
Yep.
As opposed to, hey, I'm going to go and use that tennis hit-up wall and just go down and practice and have a hit whenever I want. Yeah. And, hey, I was planning to get down there at 6 o'clock, but I've winded up down there at 6:45. Yeah. But I can still go down and have a hit. Oh, someone's there. Hey, do you mind if I just work in with you? You use half, I use half. Yeah, cool, awesome. Yeah. Yeah. It's that kind of attitude that people are wanting out of things. And I think that sport struggles to work out how to work in with that. They're trying. They're trying, the recreational aspects of sport, the social sport, they're trying to work out how to factor that in. Yeah. But just by the nature of sport, there needs to be some kind of structured element to it. Yeah. That's the unfortunate thing. Yeah. And that's where it's going to struggle, that aspect of it, the commitment side of things. Yeah. There's some interesting work around informal sport that's coming out of Monash Uni where they're just looking at the groups that just get together and just go down and play cricket or play soccer or whatever it might be at public parks. And it might be a footy oval or a cricket oval, but it's community groups that are just getting together themselves. It might be organised via a WhatsApp group or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But again, it's just because it's that aspect of you might turn up one week, you might not the next. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
There's
right.
There's no commitment aspect there.
Don't need to make up the numbers.
Yeah. But it comes with all of the kind of legality issues of, council gets in the way aspect of things. But there's formal people that have booked it and all of that side of things that comes with that, which is interesting in its own. Like there's a whole PhD there that could be done.
That's for someone else. Someone else could do that one. Well, so we're here at SMANS, and you're going to do a presentation later today. So what are you going to be talking about?
So I'm essentially talking about my PhD to date, essentially. So being that I'm 2/3 of the way through my PhD, I'm giving a little bit of an update. And running with WTF, where's the funding? That's my my title of the presentation. So really narrowing down on the findings from the interview and survey aspect of things, and what's coming out of that, which is really, I guess the key thing that's coming out of that is politics. Yeah. That's the big thing. That's what's driving a lot of things, and the funding in particular, just around the stakeholders, what they're saying is happening in the funding space, and that it is so heavily skewed towards sport, and they recognise that, and also that they recognise that that's probably not right, that they're probably not getting that right, that's not the right mix. They need to change it, but they're struggling to change it. So the internal conversations that they're having, they're struggling to change it. They haven't got the data to help them. And those kind of things. So that's what the presentation's about. And then it's kind of so where to next? So looking at financial side of things. So scraping through council budgets and things like that to have a look at, well, where is the dollars actually going? And getting some of the hard data on that.
Yeah, right. Well, so is there any kind of, are you hoping to get any kind of feedback or discuss anything in particular on the back of that?
Look, I think it'll be an interesting one just in terms of it's probably not a traditional sports management thing I'm talking about. So it'll be interesting to see turnout, for one.
Especially on the Friday afternoon.
It's the Friday afternoon after afternoon tea, before the dinner tonight. So it's a hard time slot, and then not being a strictly sport management kind of topic.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see. The kind of turnout.
You might be surprised because sometimes it's people want to hear the different things.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting. But I just hope it kind of challenges people to think a little bit differently. The keynote we had yesterday morning was somebody kind of talking about, hey, maybe sport isn't all it's cracked up to be. Maybe it doesn't have all these great benefits necessarily that, we always say, yeah, sport's great, isn't it? Maybe not. So it's kind of along that kind of similar. I love sport. I'm a diehard sports tragic, so that's definitely not my spin on things. But mine is very much more around maybe there's something we could do slightly different here. To get people active. That's my bent. Is sport's not quite working to get people active. Maybe we could do something different here. Instead of hearing that keynote yesterday, and it's had a few people talking around. It was an interesting way of framing things to start the conference. I'm kind of going to be ending the conference with a similar kind of, hey, sport's not the answer in this space either for physical activity necessarily.
Well, I think you've certainly made me think about things, and like I said before, I'm interested in the systems and the human-centeredness of it, and I'm a migrant to Australia. I've been here, this is my 15th year in Australia, but what becomes immediately apparent is it's a sporting nation, and they wear that on their sleeve. At this point, maybe I could say we wear that on our sleeve. But I think that's where it's good that you have the data, and that's where you can come in and you can make, or help them make, ideally, evidence-backed decisions. Because there is a bit of we're a sporting nation, obviously we want to promote sport. If we build cricket pitches, we can play AFL and cricket. But with all the barriers to entry, cricket is expensive. You've got the kit. AFL is expensive too. You've got the kit. And is that actually drawing people? Certainly it's drawing kids in. And we've all seen the numbers. Take AFL, for example. They like to tout that it's the most popular participation sport for youth. Cricket also tries to say the same thing. They're using different numbers, I think.
Every sport. Every sport is saying that they're either the number one sport or they have record participation numbers. Wow, population is going up every year. So of course you do. But that, yes, you might have record participation numbers, but my kind of counter argument to a lot of that is, but as a volume of total participation, it's dropping. Of the total population of the nation, it's dropping in terms of participation in sport. So yes, you got more volume of numbers, which is fantastic. I mean, sport's never going to die in this country. We are a sporting nation, as you say. We always will be. It's not going to die, but it's just understanding. But there is this whole other space that we are opting to do because it's in our own time when we want to do it, how we want to do it. That's what's getting us active. That's what's keeping us healthy.
And into adulthood as well.
Exactly.
Because kids have nothing but time. So to go to training and everything multiple times a week, that's their life.
Exactly right.
Whether or not they're going to be elite athletes.
Exactly.
For an adult to get out and, that's... I've embarrassed myself by saying I've never used the tennis courts across the street from my house. So
exactly. Or you have a couple of knee reconstructions like me and go, sport's out of the question now. What else is there?
How can I move my body?
And with Australia being a sporting nation, 10 years ago, the Australian Sports Commission came out with their megatrends report, which everyone kind of refers to it as. And one of those megatrends was essentially along the lines of, changing trend to these individualized activities. So away from sport, competition, to health being the driver. We're going to do individual things when we want to do them for health. That was 10 years ago. They were telling us this is happening and will happen. They came out with another megatrends report, I think last year it was, saying, that happened and it's still happening. We kind of as a nation, from like a funding point of view and things like that and infrastructure, haven't really changed anything in 10 years.
Right.
So that's my like takeaway and kind of call to action. And it's what I'll be finishing my presentation with a little bit today as well. Here is a little bit of a call to action to go, hey, Australian Sports Commission said 10 years ago this is happening. We kind of just ignored it. And here we are 10 years later and they've said it again.
Yeah. And we've had a pandemic in the meantime, which also changed people's attitudes toward
it. So maybe we should be thinking about this a bit more, a bit closer. And challenge that thinking a little bit more.
That's really interesting. And I think it as well, it's just about lifestyles. In Australia as well, something I'm always telling my sports students, anyone in this room who pays taxes should have an interest in people moving their bodies because it's a state healthcare system. So if you want better positive public health outcomes, people need to move their bodies. And you have to create not only facilities, put a tennis court across the road, okay, but I still haven't used this. You need to work out, why am I not using it? And what can we change to reduce those barriers? But as you said, not even structured sport, but just the physical activity side of things. Well, I certainly hope people come along and hear your call to action because it's very interesting. But we will get into the last couple of questions, one of which is, what's on the horizon for you? Are there other conferences that you want to go to? You mentioned some publications earlier.
Look, moving into kind of third year of the PhD, the observations are coming up. So I'll be out in parks watching people. So that's going to kind of take up a fair chunk. So that's what's on the horizon for me kind of immediately. But the publication side of things, so out of the interviews and the surveys, publications out of those, what's on the immediate horizon from an academic point of view. Also have a scoping review in the works.
Nice.
So that should hopefully be coming out at some point next year, fingers crossed, hopefully through that process. But from a conference point of view as well, I'm actually jet setting off to New Zealand straight after this conference.
So I'll see you there because I'm at Ansell's,
Yes. So I'll be at Ansell's next week, and then I'm tacking on the World Leisure Congress, which is the week after as well.
In Dunedin there,
Yes, so doing those two.
Wow, the triple whammy.
So I thought I'd make the most of it. The wife's joining for the New Zealand leg of the trip. So spend 2 weeks in New Zealand, which is lovely. So doing those two, and I've got my eyes on one in Paris in October. No, so actually the International Society of Physical Activity and Health.
Oh, okay.
So the physical activity side of stuff, which is obviously right up my alley with what I'm doing. Paris is always nice. So
EASM is in Paris, but I think it might be in mid-September.
I think it's just before. So I might be able to swing a little Euro trip in between and bookend, and I might be able to make that work.
Yeah, that could be good.
So that's on the horizon for the conference side of things.
Okay,
Hopefully
nice.
that's the grand plans, hopefully, for the end of next year.
You've worked out one of the appeals of the academic career is
Definitely,
the
yeah.
destination.
Exactly. got to get at least one international conference in the PhD somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even though that New Zealand technically counts, it sort of feels like it's
the next door neighbours.
yeah, that's right. Well, that's cool that we'll be in Auckland together next week. What are you looking at, because you have so many things going on with your consultancy, as well as your PhD now, but what are you thinking about post-PhD? Are you looking at a career in academia?
It's something I've really been reflecting on. It's something that I probably came into the PhD thinking, no, I'm not going to go for a career in academia. I want to come in, I want to answer some questions, potentially jump out again, go back to industry.
Yeah.
But I've had the opportunity to do some teaching. That's opened up my eyes to the kind of world of academia as well. I never thought I'd teach. I've loved it. I've really enjoyed it. So that's kind of opened up that side of things as well. And it's definitely brought me around a little bit to going, hey, maybe a career in academia could be something. Yeah. I think I'll probably end up being somewhere in the middle and being a pracademic.
Yeah.
So still working in industry, potentially being a consultant, but still working in academia, potentially, as doing the research-based work.
Yeah.
So, doing that couple of days in academia on research-based projects, a couple of days consulting, trying to hit that sweet spot. That's probably maybe where I'll land, I think. Yeah. Looking for that full-time academic role probably won't be where I end up, but it'll be that sweet spot if that can be achieved. And look, that tends to be, it's where you have to start as a fresh PhD graduate generally anyway, is, a couple of cobbled together, couple of days here or there, so that works perfectly for what I want to do from that world anyway.
I think that's, speaking of broader trends, right? I think that's the way academia as a sector or an industry is trending anyway, is toward kind of DIY positions that you want to have a little bit of consultancy, you want to teach, but just a little bit, and you mostly want to do research, and so you find your own fractions. Yeah. Because unis, we spoke a little bit about this before we started recording, unis are struggling to be relevant in society, I reckon, and that's a little bit battling the history of what uni is and what it's for and who it's for, and in many ways that's moved in positive directions. It's now, in many cases, with notable exceptions, for everybody. There are still barriers for some folks, but we're trying our best. But what unis need to do is strike the balance between the practical and the theoretical, and I think that's where you come in. So I think you might end up creating a position for yourself. Yeah,
and look, there's definitely conversations I've had both with universities, so different universities, but also within industry, around the need or the existing lack of industry-specific courses, particularly in my industry being kind of the local government space, so that kind of community recreation space. We tend to hire sports management graduates who generally come out of sports management degrees with an intent of pro sport or national sporting organisation. That's where I'm going to work.
Usually from a business school as well.
Whereas, it's local council, it's about community.
Yeah.
It's community sport. We're here to serve the community. It's about the people. That's the underlying driver. And providing community facilities is a lot different. Yeah. And there isn't anything that fills that void. There used to be community recreation courses back in the day. They don't exist anymore. Yeah.
Now the closest thing probably is leisure studies, hey?
Yeah, and even that has kind of really, there's not too many around anymore. There's really, like, if I use Victoria as an example, I don't think there's one at the moment. It's all sports management.
Right.
As the key. So it's basically sports science or sport management. Yeah. There's not the kind of community recreation or leisure element to it as a bachelor or as a major necessarily. Right. And then there's a whole other side of things in my industry around kind of the parks industry. And there's been a lot of change in that space around some of the TAFE courses and things like that have disappeared.
Yeah.
So there's a real gap, I think, in the market in that space as well, which is that practical industry functional space, which I'd love to fill.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what I'm going to be talking about in Ansels next week, actually, is interdisciplinary approaches to leisure studies in that case, but I've also given some more talks about doing it in sport management. But that kind of highlights the fact that I can talk about different fields. What I want to do is bring them all together, and a student locates themselves in that, but you have to draw from all those different sources so that a student can do something like what you're doing and find themselves at, for you, as you described, it sort of happened one decision at a time. It wasn't a plan, but it could be someone's plan.
I was just very lucky to do a random placement. Didn't set out to do it, just sent out a bunch of random emails. One got back. I thought it was like a sports management consultancy. Turned out to be a council planning consultancy. Took me on. Yep. And that's, here I am kind of 15 years later.
Here you are.
Have had a career in it and now doing a PhD.
Yeah.
Never thought that would have happened, but here I am.
Yep.
And that was just absolutely random because I didn't know it was government was kind of a career choice.
Yeah. Yeah. You made your own path.
Yeah.
The last question that I ask everybody is something outside of your PhD that you're excited about at the moment.
It's going to sound a bit strange, but I've recently taken up cycling, which has kind of taken over everything outside of kind of work and PhD life. I used to hate cyclists in terms of, I was the classic person on the road going, get out of the way, get off the road. I'm now one of those that's on the road in the Lycra, fully kitted up, bought the new bike about 2 months ago. It's an expensive hobby, and it's turned into training for a triathlon.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah, so... Yeah, got the cycling down pat, got the running down pat, that's fine. It's the open water swimming that's going to be a bit scary.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's, it's equal excitement and fear that's there in equal measures for that. So that's kind of what's driving me outside of the kind of PhD and work world is training. Like I've always used training as the kind of thing to keep me just ticking along in the background.
Yep.
Obviously, all those years back, exercise science, it was a passion area, keeping fit, keeping healthy. So triathlon's the new bug that's got a grip of me at the moment.
Nice.
As I said earlier, 2 knee reconstructions, so sport's out of the question for me. So it's trying to find things that are kind of straight line activities.
Yep.
Cycling, running, swimming. It's all great stuff for the knee. So it's about all I can do now.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But so that's the exciting and equally scary thing is the open water swimming.
Yeah, sure. Any ambitions to compete one day, or it's...
So there's a couple of events on the horizon. So the 2XU triathlons in Melbourne. So there's one late Jan, I think it is, that is on the cards, pending training schedule post-travel.
Yeah.
We'll see what kind of shape I'm in post-New Zealand, see what I can keep up with. But so that's the first one. But it's just essentially a sprint triathlon, so just short distances.
Okay.
As a little test the waters.
Yeah.
Literally test the waters, and we'll see where that goes in terms of pushing the boundaries of distances and things like that. Love to at least tick off a kind of Olympic distance triathlon. I don't think I'd want to go too much further than that distance-wise.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for taking the time. I really enjoyed this chat. We've had many chats when there weren't microphones in our faces, but I've enjoyed this one for sure, and I hope listeners do too. I wish you all the best with everything you're trying to do, including the triathlon.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully the knee holds up. Hopefully there's no injuries, and you really enjoyed the chat. It's always great to conceptualize everything that's going on, and be able to take a step back and talk about everything.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Thanks again, Dan.
Thank you.